I
But
didn't know that. I just learned something new right here, real live. This is why you should watch this channel and subscribe and leave comments, because Pat's way smarter than me, and there's no way you're going to watch this and not learn something. Please
well,
continue, Your Honor.
the fact, yeah, the fact of the matter is,
Mr. Brown, I'm concerned. I don't want to say angst or agita or any of that ethnic kind of stuff, but I have concerns because I still run into people after all these years who are convinced the reason they got the lower score on their knowledge test, or the reason that their practical test didn't go as well as they thought, they got caught by a trick question. And it kills me because I've maintained for decades there are no trick questions. There are very specific questions, and you have to be prepared for them. What say you, Mr. Brown?
well, I would agree with you, Jamie. There's no trick questions per se on the FAA written test, if that's what we're talking about. I will, however, say that there are some poorly worded questions that could be taken in a bit of an ambiguous way. And that's entirely different than an intentionally tricked question. But what it really means is that when you're taking the written test specifically, you really have to read the words and read the words carefully.
And there is a problem with the knowledge test, the written test, that doesn't happen in the practical test. If there's a regulatory change,
Right.
that happens, and the testing database takes a while to catch up. So there is a window in time where it's entirely possible that what you see as the correct answer and what was the correct answer last week is no longer the correct answer. And there may just be no way to get that particular question correct. So I guess in that case, don't stress about getting 100. Just be knowledgeable and confident. But that leads us to the practical test, because if we pass our knowledge test, we're planning on taking the practical. And that's got a challenge too, because those questions during the oral are not just yes or no questions or regurgitate some rote knowledge.
Right.
The FAA has some requirements of you guys, the DPEs, that color how the questions are posed, don't they?
Yeah, and you tease me about getting down to the weeds, and well deserved. I will say that.
I got a
Um,
lawnmower. We can deal with this.
but but as you have said so many times in the past, if you had a question on something, it's written down somewhere. And in this particular case, Jimmy and I are going to be talking about information that you can readily find in FAA Order 8900.1, specifically Volume 5, Chapter 2, Section 1. And you can do a Google search and pull that up very, very quickly. It rolls right off the tongue. But those things, that particular section, very briefly, lays out the airman certification process. It talks about IACRA and documents that have to be presented, aircraft to be used, English language skills, that kind of stuff. Covers required flight controls, covers simulator usage, and talks a lot about single pilot resource management. You'll see it abbreviated as SRM. And it discusses the use of scenarios and trigger events during the check ride. And so all of that is in 8900.1, Volume 5, Chapter 2, Section 1, starting with paragraph 5-218.
You
So if
know,
you
I
want to,
have every confidence there's at least 8 viewers who just glazed over because that's so long, that reference. But seriously, this test isn't as hard as people think, either the written or the practical. The FAA is telling you what's going to be on it. There's no mystery about it. You're not going to do any new procedures or be asked any questions you didn't already study with your CFI. Let me give you an example, Pat. I used to write books about knowledge tests, test prep guides, and things like that. The entire testing supplement, all the charts and graphs and images and figures you could see, is available free online. You can download it. You can just put in private pilot testing supplement. Boom, there it is. You download the thing. You can see all of it. And I'm going to give you 2 good examples of where people miss questions and they don't need to. One of them is the questions about VORs. I'm flying along, and which VOR am I intersecting now? Which one am I crossing now? People try to do that in their head because they're testing, and there's a figure with 9 VOR dials, and it tells you which one you're looking at. All you have to do, Pat, is draw the scenario on a piece of paper. And you're allowed to have scrap paper. But if I put where the station is and where I am and where the radials are, this becomes pretty simple. But people are convinced it's impossible to figure out because there's all this information. No, there's one question, there's one VOR, draw it on a piece of paper. Good to go.
Yeah, I always hated that question or those questions. There were several of them in the test bank like that, and I always hated those things. Hated those things. So,
Well, there's another that's really common, and I suspect for all time this will be true. And it's this image right here. There's 2 runways crossing, one of them's closed, and there's a wind indicator there. And people are in a rush. They've got self-induced pressure. I need to finish quickly because I need to tell my friends I got a 98 and did this in 14 minutes. Just slow down, because people get this question wrong all the time because, oh, there's the windsock and this one was closed. So that's not a windsock. That's a tetrahedron. The symbol is different. And because it's a tetrahedron, it's showing you where the wind is coming from, not where the wind is going to. So if you assume that's a windsock, you'll be wrong every time. That's a really common one, Pat, that really comes down to understanding the rules for which runway are you going to use, where is the wind coming from, and
right.
does an X on a runway mean something beyond
Yeah.
Elon Musk was here?
Yeah. Oh, and I totally agree with you there. But before we go any further, let me just tell folks that shouldn't they like and subscribe?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. If you don't like and subscribe, we have a new technology that just cuts off the video and won't give you any of the correct answers. We
Oh
won't tell you
no.
the truth.
Oh no. Let's hope that doesn't happen. So, and by the way, everything that we're talking about here, basically from this point forward, in terms of this FAA order that we talked about, um, we'll put that in the show notes so that you can just click on that, or at least you can copy paste and go from there. So, anyway, so all that said, Jamie, let's talk a little bit about trick questions.
Well, in the practical test specifically, let's get to that because that's where rote understanding, application, correlation, the levels of learning. This is interesting because rote learning is useless on the practical test, in my opinion. You're going to have to correlate information, and they're not going to tell you that. They're going to give you a scenario. The FAA has shifted to scenario-based learning, which actually is great because it's more like real life.
Right.
So let's say, Pat, I'm the DBE, and we go out to the airplane and you do the pre-flight and I'm watching you and maybe asking a few questions as we go. And you finish up and you say, okay, we're all set to go. Just climb in, sir. And I say, well, Pat, how can you show me this airplane is airworthy right now? That's a pretty open-ended question. There's not one answer to that, but there is one realm of material that you should be referencing.
Well, that would certainly be that would be something you would be talking about in the oral,
Mhm.
and so the question might be, what inspection? The rote question would be, what inspections are required for the airplane? That's the rote question.
Mhm.
But the scenario based question is exactly what you're talking about, Jamie. It might be, how did you determine that the airplane is airworthy for the flight today? Or it might be, um, the inspector just basically asks you if your documents are in order in the airplane. And, what those, it may be something just like that. Um, so you always want to be, the applicant always wants to be kind of tuned in to what could really be the underlying question to the scenario that's being shown. So in your particular question, you're asking to see the arrow documents, and you're asking to see the annual and the 100 hour if it's required. and the pedostatic altimeter test and the ELT, and those things that are basically on the and the ADs as well too, is would be something that the inspector has got to see, the examiner's got to see, and basically everything that's on that AV8 acronym that we see oftentimes.
That's the interesting thing where I say it requires you to correlate because there's a lot of information available, and I have to answer that question in a reasonable manner. And now it's more of a conversational thing. It's not test. I ask a question, you give me an answer. It's more of a process, which is more like real life. Even if you're out there flying with your family, and the question is you're out there, you're getting ready to go flying with your family, and some nice man from the FAA wanders up and says, I would like to offer you a complimentary ramp check because I'm in a great mood. uh, what do you have to show that fella? And that's a conversational question. Yeah, there might be some hard swallow there, like your heart rate goes, but that could happen.
Well, and you say a complimentary ramp check, and I have to laugh because if you look in the order that we've been talking about, some of these things that we're referring to are actually in that order in terms of scenario-based questions, and in that order, it actually calls it a complimentary ramp inspection. That's what they call it.
What a
So
wonderful kindness.
isn't it though? So the rote question is, what do you have to carry with you when you fly? That's the rote question. All right. Well, I've got to have my pilot certificate. I've got to have my photo ID, and I've got to have my FAA medical or basic med, or if I'm flying under sport pilot rules, my current U.S. driver's license. So that's the rote question. But if you're asked for example something like this, or maybe it's just something as simple, maybe the examiner just simply says, how did you determine that you're qualified to act as PIC today?
Hmm.
That is the question that makes you now have to stop and think, oh yeah, all these other things. You've got to correlate that information, that's not just a rote answer.
It's a fascinating thing to me, and maybe it's because we've spent all these years as CFIs. But
Yeah.
thinking about the testing process, and just so viewers know, if your CFI is signing you off, they've been through at least 4 check rides themselves. Private instrument, commercial CFI, that's the minimum. You've got to have that experience. So they should be preparing you to go in and deal with this, where you're not going to get these yes or no questions or just regurgitate this answer back. The examiner is going to set up a scenario that you have to explain, why am I doing what I'm doing, or what am I required to do? And that could even extend to them just saying, is this a commercial flight? Is this a flight for hire? As we head off for Hamburger and Corpus Christi with 2 friends in the airplane,
Yeah.
how do you know you're not for hire? Can you
Well,
discuss that?
yeah. So once again, the rote question might be something like, can you be paid to fly someone somewhere? Or you're flying somewhere for $100 hamburger, and your friend offers to pay all the expenses and can buy your lunch. That would be the rote question.
Hmm.
But a scenario-based question might be something like, well, like this, where the inspector is actually there asking you if this is for hire, and maybe somebody in your airplane asks you, well, why is he asking that question? And
Hmm.
now in the oral, if this is a scenario where the oral is that the FAA is ramp checking you, and one of your passengers says, why is that important that this is for hire or not? Now you've got to explain to the designated examiner sitting across the table, how are you going to answer that question? And it brings up the whole thing that you can only do the pro rata share, et cetera, et cetera.
I really like things like this, though. I like the shift to scenario based because that exact thing has happened to me. I
Yeah.
mean, I have had a bigwig at my bank contact me and say, "Hey, you fly. My spouse and I wanted to go to Key West. Can you fly us down there and then bring us home later?" And I have to say, "No, I can't, because you're asking me to supply the airplane and fly you. That's now a for hire flight."
Right.
Whereas if I'm going someplace exotic and spectacular, as I do so often, Pat, and I have a 4-seat airplane, but I'm going alone, I could put up on social media, say, "Hey, on this date, I'm going here. Is anybody interested in riding along?" That's a different thing, because I was already going there. I'm taking that flight. Now I'm just asking basically a big digital room full of people, "Does anybody want to come with me?" And I can
Yeah.
say yes or no based on who responds.
Yeah, but now you're even still getting into a green area, a gray area, I should say, because if they don't have a reason to go with you, there's not common purpose. So now you're starting to get into kind of a gray area of that almost Uber-ish kind of. You got to be real careful about that kind of stuff. If,
I
for
wonder
example,
if lunch at a specific restaurant counts as
well,
a common purpose.
Well, let's that I mean that's a really great question. Let's just say that the scenario is that I'm planning on flying to Fort Lauderdale for lunch today. Anybody want to join me?
Hmm.
That probably okay. Probably okay. But if you want to remove all doubt, then it would probably be more appropriate that gosh, uh, we have a group of pilots that all go to Fort Lauderdale for lunch on Wednesdays,
Hmm.
and somebody's airplane is broken and needs a ride.
Hmm.
That no problem, at least in my opinion, no problem.
What
But
I
if you're
like
kind of
about this is it's not a clear cut yes or no,
yes,
black or white question. That's the whole point of scenario.
yeah,
There's nuance to things, and we
yes,
have to explain it. And as you explain your position, the examiner gets a real idea: how well do you understand this material? And
right,
and if you have a misunderstanding, that's not a bust.
no.
That's like, okay, there's something. Your examiner might say, "You might want to read up on that part when you get home. Did great on the ride in every other respect, but that part you might want to look into." I'm not allowed to instruct, but I'll point out that there may be
Well,
some.
in the debrief, that's not true. In the debrief, you can do
Oh,
all the instructing that you want.
I
But
didn't know that. I just learned something new right here, real live. This is why you should watch this channel and subscribe and leave comments, because Pat's way smarter than me, and there's no way you're going to watch this and not learn something. Please
well,
continue, Your Honor.
the fact, yeah, the fact of the matter is that the ride has been brought to a conclusion. The paperwork has been done, whether it's a disapproval, disapproval really, or a certificate handed to you, your temp certificate handed to you. The ride's over. And so there's nothing that says I can't put on my CFI hat at that point. And frankly, quite often I do, because it's really the only opportunity that I have to exercise that CFI muscle, if you will. And oftentimes the applicants find it very, very helpful to get another perspective on whatever it is that it is. But you're right. One misunderstanding in and of itself, unless it's really egregious, is not likely going to scuttle the ride at all. Again, I'm sure there's exceptions to that, where you just have something so badly out of whack that the examiner says we can't go any further. But generally speaking, that's not going to scuttle the ride. So
So
anyway,
the executive summary of this episode is, whether you're taking a knowledge test or a practical test, everything you're going to have to do, every topic you're going to have to cover is written down, illustrated. It's all available to you ahead of time. And you can treat your examiner like an actual person who's just observing, asking questions and observing, and might actually teach you something at the end that you take away as truly valuable.
yeah, I think that's a really good way to look at it in a very verbose way. So very very good way to
That's
look
my
at that.
skill set, man.
Yeah, I'm telling you. Um, and there are other things that for example, um, the examiner is going to find out some way to ask you what the requirements are for currency. In other words, your 90-day and night takeoffs and landings. It might be something as simple as your DPE says to you, when you look at your logbook, um, you notice that the last time you flew at night was 4 months ago. Um, you're going to be coming back from your trip today after dark. Does that matter? It might be asked it's not, I can tell you that he or she is not going to say, tell me what the requirements are for day currency and night currency. It will not be asked that way.
Well, when we teach the AOPA Rusty Pilot, that's one of the scenarios, and I actually love it because we have a scenario where you go out to your pre-flight, you find a flat tire, you have to get it fixed,
Yeah.
and now your departure pushed back, and it's December 31st, theoretically, when we're making this flight. And I always ask the audience as we get to that part, now, we've been pushed back several hours and we're departing late. What's going to happen on this flight that wasn't going to happen when we departed in the morning? And
Yeah.
almost nobody ever catches it, that the sun is going to set on this flight and we're going to get to our destination, as you say, with passengers at night. Am I
Right.
night current? And that's the great thing about this. You have to correlate this information. There's extraneous factors that you have to figure out because you're PIC. You have to know before you go. You don't want to be over the Gulf flying along in the sun setting and you're like, gee, there's no place for me to land and I'm not legal now. This isn't great.
Yeah. And there's another example straight out of 8900.1. You're pre-flighting the airplane. And this is the DPE setting this particular scenario. You're pre-flighting the airplane, and you find out that the landing light is inoperative. What are you going to do? And so now, this is what he's looking for: is, do you know about 91.205? Do you know about minimum equipment lists? Do you know about the kinds of operations equipment list, which some airplanes have, some older ones don't? But in other words, we're coming back at night,
Mm-hmm.
and the landing light burns out during your taxi out for takeoff. Is the airplane legally airworthy to fly? And so that could be a scenario that you're given, and the examiner is hoping that tomato flames and flaps and grab card and all of those other acronyms. But more importantly, knowing the acronym isn't nearly as important. Acronyms, plural, is not nearly as important as knowing where to find the information. I would much rather have an applicant say to me, oh, yeah, that's a 91.205. I'll probably say, yeah, well, let's go look it up and just make sure.
That might be the most misunderstood thing on a check ride when people are nervous. And you ask that question, and I say it's in 91.205, but I don't have that memorized. And I start freaking out. I could just say, let me pull it out and we'll take a look at that right now. That's
Yeah,
perfectly fine.
yeah.
Being a PIC and referring to the correct reference material is a
Right.
good thing, not a bad thing.
And then the examiner, again, following along with this idea of the inoperative landing light, the examiner may say, um, well, something, you've got one in your hangar, you've got a spare bulb in your hangar. Can you replace it? Oh, oh. So the rote question might be, what preventive maintenance can the pilot do on his or her own airplane if you're certificated?
Mm-hmm.
That's the rote question. But the way it's phrased is, you've got a burned out landing light. Can you as a certificated private pilot replace it? And the answer is yes, you can, but you have to know where to go to find it. And I would say 50% of people that I do check rides for know where to look to find that information. Eventually, most of them find it, but only about half actually know specifically where to go look.
I think this has been a great topic to discuss, and we could talk about this for hours because there's
Yeah,
so many scenarios, there's so many different aircraft and situations and airspace. But I think the point of this is you don't have to go into the testing environment thinking, I'm going to get tripped up by a trick, because there are no tricks. And you don't have to go in thinking, gee, I hope I've memorized everything, because you don't have to memorize everything. You just have
Correct.
to have an understanding of the overall and look up your reference material if you need to.
Yeah, all of the information, as we've talked about so many times before, all the information in the ACS that you're responsible for knowing um, is listed at the top of the page on each area of operation. It lists all of the FAA documents and where these questions and this information could come from and can be found. So there's really no excuse for bombing on the oral if you're reasonably familiar with what's in the ACS and reasonably familiar with what documentation is available there.
I leave you with this thought for people of a certain age, and you have to have seen Animal House, perhaps one of the greatest movies ever made. D-Day and Bluto steal the test. They go dumpster diving to steal the test, and unfortunately steal the wrong one, and the whole class fails. My apologies for the spoiler. The FAA gives you everything. You don't have to go dumpster diving. It's all written down. It's all available as a free PDF. Any one of us can go look this up at any time, whether you're a student, an applicant, a CFI, a DPE, it's there. Go refer to it.
Yeah, I agree.
And with that, I believe we've saved America once again, Pat. You've been a wonderful guest, and thank you so much for taking part in this lovely experience.
All right, my friend. Adios.